Clean Energy Collective.
Isaac Baker, Co-op Power.
I'm Kevin Schulte from Sustainable Energy Developments.
Chad Moran from Vice President.
Chris Niles from Solar Ones.
Joseph Goodman, Rocky Mountain Institute.
Hi guys.
Does everybody want to come over here?
Yeah, feel free to move around the space and make this your own.
Yeah, we don't have to be super organized anymore, so feel free to, if you're kind of far away, you can come closer.
And I'm going to do my best to read your handwriting, and I apologize in advance if I don't quite get your question right. So I'm going to just start with some kind of more specific questions for the panelists, just to get some clarification. See how this goes, and pretty soon I'll probably cut it off, and we'll kind of move into more general concepts. So this one's just for co-op power, pretty specific. The question is whether any of the costs to the members go back into replacing panels, and I guess maybe general maintenance when needed.
Is this working?
Yes.
So like any other developer, if you had to replace an inverter or replace broken panels, the developer takes on that responsibility and does not pass that on to communities. So when you give a community member a choice to prepay or to pay over time, you account for a certain amount of contingency costs, and that would be true for any developer, I think, at the table.
Hopefully that answers it. All right.
Yeah, actually, maybe to just add a little bit on that. I know there are some models out there that folks have come up with that they offer an arrangement where there's a maintenance fee, almost like a condo or a timeshare, where the operations and maintenance is an annual charge to members. We don't do that, but I'm saying that's a viable model that I've seen folks do. For us, similar to what was just mentioned, we actually fund an O&M trust fund up front, so that way the customer doesn't have to worry, well, what if Clean Energy Collective disappears in 5 years? Right? Well, how do I know that the array is going to be maintained? So that's another kind of, there's some form of trust or restricted account or other arrangement to pre-fund or otherwise fund the ongoing operations and maintenance.
So my company, Sustainable Energy Developments, I'm sorry I missed you this morning, I had a sick little boy, I had to find coverage for it. But we are offering only PPAs to the offtake, to potential customers. We're calling them subscribers. So we're not offering an ownership model into our community solar arrays. We'll own them 100%. And the answer to that question more specifically for us is there is absolutely no maintenance cost that would ever impact the power purchase relationship to the resident or the subscriber that's buying power off the
Okay, so for grid alternatives, do you have your own or do you use tech partners? I think tools for advertising, membership, so sign up, collections, meeting credits, etc. And if yes, who's the tech person?
We do not. We do not use any tech partners. We're a full EPC company, so we do all engineering, procurement, and construction from start to finish. The only partners, if you will, that we use, again, are job training organizations, community colleges, and just general public workforce volunteers who come on and help us install with the arrays. We do not have any tech partners assistance. We are a tech.
And so for Clean Energy Collective, with the quote pay-as-you-go community solar model, who's responsible for the billing and collecting with the homeowner? Can the solar developer set this up through the utility, and if so, what are the costs?
Yeah, so with what we offer on our pay-as-you-go model, we would handle all of the administration and operation for the array. So Clean Energy Collective would do that. In terms of developers, a developer can work with us a number of different ways. They can either originate projects that we would acquire, and then we would finish them up, if you will, and be the entity that offers it to the subscribers. The developer gets paid their fee. Or the other way that actually my coworker Hannah Masterjohn is talking about in the other room as we speak is we offer our tool set, what we call a community solar platform. So if someone wants to create and operate their own community solar project and handle the subscribers and everything themselves, then they can subscribe and use our tools that would enable them to administrate the process, track who gets what credits, provide the output to the utilities so the utilities know what to put on their bill, handle the interaction with subscribers, all that kind of stuff is available as a tool set.
Cool, thank you. All right, so moving into some more general questions. I think probably you can answer this pretty easily. Question is, can the host site, and I guess we should answer this specifically to New York, be in a different, quote, utility area than the members and beneficiaries? Okay. Clearly no.
And it has to be in the same load zone as well.
There is one exception on the investment model.
Do you want to elaborate?
Tell us more.
We're all looking for the piece of that cast.
Well,
I
you're
would,
talking about from a financial, you could invest in.
Okay.
You can't get the electricity benefits on your bill unless you're in the same load zone and utility service territory.
You're getting a return, the investment made.
Okay, this is about the 15-year property tax exemption. How do you prevent these projects after the 15 years from being rezoned and or burdened with overtaxing, financial barriers, etc.?
You do one of two things. You either enter into a pilot agreement, a payment in lieu of taxes agreement with the municipality. So we would right now talk to the municipality if they're interested in that, so that they know what the taxes will be, and so do we after year 15. Is one way to do it. The other is, frankly, what I would hope everybody would be doing, which is encouraging the taxation situation from a legislative perspective in the state to be addressed in legislation and extended beyond 15 years. There's a good amount of talk about that that's actually already happening. So I expect it'll probably be addressed in some way legislatively, but we always talk with the towns right now where we're permitting, and if they would like to do a pilot, then I will.
In the model that we're promoting right now with the subscription model, we would take the risk anyway, so it would never show up to you on your bill. Your rate will be set. And so if there's an increase in property tax that we can't manage either through a pilot or some legislative change in the property tax rules, then we would be taking the hit on the property tax in year 15 if that came to fruition.
Just to add to it more generally, go sign up as many households as you can. Create as much real community economic benefit as possible. Sign up thousands of people. So in year 15, it's literally, if they want to increase, someone wants to increase taxes, it's taking money out of one hand and putting it in the other. Right? Taxes are about community benefit. If the system's creating community benefit, then why put friction in that loop? Just keep generating that real economic benefit.
So this is a question about low and moderate incomes and sort of what annual household incomes are we talking about when we say low and moderate income? As a quick question.
It's typically, the category of low and moderate income is typically 80% or below of the area median. So it's calibrated to your local region.
We had a lot of questions for the utility companies. But Chris has them in the other room, I think, because I think he's going to ask them. But maybe we can do a little, maybe we can get them back from him, and in a minute we can do a little Q&A with each other. I wasn't expecting you to be in here, so I gotta grab them from Chris. Okay, so we have some questions about sort of co-op model, subscription model, whether there's hybrid models. And so I thought maybe we could get into a little bit of a discussion there, because I think that's a big question that people have in their minds when they're thinking about approaching developing shared solar or sponsoring shared solar, what kind of model they want to go with. So maybe a few of you could talk about what you see as some of the pros and cons of a direct ownership model versus a subscription model, and then I know the co-op model is its own kind of type of ownership.
I'll jump in there. So we work across multiple states here and therefore have to play ball with a lot of different rules around how this works. But Vermont, so far as my research goes, is the only state in the US that's pioneered a relatively scalable straight ownership model where you can just incorporate an LLC and a whole community can just throw money in, get the tax credit out, and it's like putting solar on your roof. And they've gone through a 2-year securities process with a lot of lawyers, and Vermont is really good at doing stuff like that. As far as bringing that to other states go, it's a really cumbersome process. So if you stay, for direct ownership, if you stay below certain system sizes, like a 30 or a 50 kilowatt or something like that, that's very possible for communities to do together. And the big piece is just around advertising. If you're trying to advertise broadly, that is the big securities issue to non-accredited investors and different pieces like that. So that's the direct ownership model. And I could keep going for a while, but I'll let other people jump in.
Let's just take a quick survey. Who in the room owns their car? Raise your hand. Who in the room leases a car? Raise your hand. Who in the room takes public transportation or Uber as a service? Sometime, anywhere. Right? Yeah, sometime. Great. We want options. We're consumers. We like lots of options. Why don't we have options with solar? Right? There's different demographics, there's different consumer profiles. We should have options that enable everybody to participate in a market that creates value for consumers.
Amen.
Okay, so let's say we have options. Now I'm, a community member thinking about how I'm going to get community solar going in my area. And I have to sort of figure out what kind of installer or developer I'm working with. Maybe I'm doing a request for proposals to look for a certain kind of project. What do I need to think about in terms of the pros and cons of these different models? Are there certain constituencies that one serves better than the other? Let's dig into this a little bit. I know there's a lot of, some of you have a very specific kind of approach to this, and I think we can tease it out a little bit.
Sure, so the barrier to entry, if you will, is certainly lowest if you're just pay as you go. It's just a contract where you pay for whatever credit shows up at your bill at a 10 or 15% discount over what you were paying before, and there's no upfront payment. That's certainly the simplest model, but you may get a greater discount if you're able to put a little bit upfront. You may get a tax benefit if you're able to have an ownership model and you find value in taking the tax credit of the portion of the project that you own. So that's where the options come in, and I think it becomes a little bit more complicated as you get more and more ownership stake in the project, speaking very broadly. So I think simple, sort of straightforward is you just are signing a power purchase agreement or net metering credit agreement in the form of the community solar project where you just get the discount on your bill and you call it a day, and you transfer that. If you move in some way, shape, or form, it becomes a little more complicated, but the potential return on investment is higher if you're having an ownership stake. And so I think that's where having options, so if you don't have the capacity to pay some form of payment up front, it's certainly easier to just have sort of the no down payment savings process.
We like the subscription idea, large in part because we don't want to burden our subscribers with the potential challenges associated with transferring ownership of an asset in a foreign place. So if you sell your home because your father in Florida got sick and you need to move to Florida to be with him, you now have this a field asset that you have to transfer ownership and tax liability and all these sort of things. So we actually have a whiteboard in my office. It's the what happens if you move to Florida is the problem and how we address that in community solar. And so the way that we've done that in the model that we're working with right now is, you know, you would have optionality. If you can find someone to fulfill your subscription, i.e. the person who buys your home, then that's fine. If not, then there's sort of different fees and structures to release you from your agreement that sort of make it fairly simple to just move in and out of the array if necessary. Obviously, the goal is to finance these is to have a good high subscription rate, good credit paying people, etc. And the only way to make that model work, in our opinion, is to have a continued customer acquisition engine for rooftop residential solar. Because if you keep acquiring customers that want to go in and someone needs to leave, then you always have someone to fulfill their spot, and then there doesn't have to be any sort of back-end challenges to someone that might want to leave. So we like that as our model, so we're sort of going with that, although we're very open to trying to figure out if an ownership model will work for us or our customers somewhere down the line.
Nationally, when a community solar project is launched and it demonstrates savings to members, there's typically a wait list. So in terms of transferring ownership, if you were to move, there's usually a group of people that are sort of waiting to participate. When community solar projects are undersubscribed, it's generally where they're paying a premium to participate in the community solar project, and they're doing so for reasons other than saving money. But when there is a clear sort of savings on your electric bill, there's generally a list. So.
Yeah, I think that, you know, if you're talking about the root of the question that you mentioned about, well, how do you decide if you're someone who wants to get a project going? As you heard, there's different aspects that you can take into account based on what you want to do and where you want to do it, what the constituencies are that you're going to offer the project to. You know, the stuff that we've experienced around the country, it is interesting. And a lot of times it's not what you think. You would think that most of the people who buy, choose the ownership model and buy in would be, you know, probably more around, let's say, age 30-ish. By far and away, our typical customer on the ownership module, product is above age 50. And the reason is simply because they really understand the value of saying, all right, I'm going to pay this for a while, or I'm going to write a check and pay this up front, or utilize financing. You know, we'll work with local credit unions or whatever for low-cost financing. I'm going to have a cost here. But I see that over a reasonable period of time, now I actually own it. I'm not making any more payments. It's fully paid for, and we own our own generation for as long as that project operates, which, you know, typically we expect to be 30 to 40 years. I mean, the panels have a 25-year warranty, not because they last 26 years. So it goes back to what Ezra was saying earlier. That is a real game changer. When people start to contemplate the power and the freedom and the self-control that can come with owning and controlling their own energy generation, it really does start to do some interesting things with how people look at the process. So absolutely right that as of right now, when most people ask them this, how many kilowatt hours does it cost for you to run the 4 light bulbs in your kitchen for an hour? No idea. So by getting these kinds of things out there into our communities, people will start to have a better understanding of how that works and what their behaviors cost them in kilowatt hours. Then they'll have a much closer and much more broad-based ability to have an appreciation for what it means to own their own generation, which is why the ongoing customer relationship, whether it's through tools like what we have, which you have on your cell phone and some of the things that other folks were talking about earlier, is really important. So it's then month after month after month, they're getting something that's helping them keep that understanding of how what they do in their homes, how it relates to kilowatt hours and therefore dollars out of their budget and impact on the environment.
I was going to add very quickly that for the Massachusetts market, like between pay-as-you-go and pay up front, we found that the savings for pay-as-you-go are around 10 to 20% is what the standard offering has been. It's been as low as 7% in hard-to-do markets like Boston, where there's, for a lot of reasons, but somewhere in 10 to 20%, and if you actually own it, you can realize well more than that, but somewhere in 20 to 40% savings through an ownership model if you're able to monetize the tax credit. And a big part of that is projects have to pay a lot of money to get other financiers to do all of this banking and tax credit work, and that's expensive. So that's why ownership often has larger returns, but whoever puts the money up front generally gets a big portion of that return, which is, but the pay-as-you-go is also attractive because it's easier to get people on board. So that's a big part of the cost benefit.
And Isaac, how does that work when you're a member of a co-op, so you're kind of collectively an owner?
It would be similar to direct ownership where you all own effectively a percentage of an array of your all owners as a cooperative, or you're all collectively owning something. So you would distribute up the tax credit and any benefits on a pro rata basis, but basically on a percentage basis based on how much you put in, how many panels you purchased, correlates to how much benefit you get out of the total array.
I have a question. If you have a mixture of people who can take the tax credits and people who can't in that co-op, how do you efficiently use the tax credits for the people who use them?
That part's still, that part's still under exploration, I would say. There are ways to do it, but it would involve basically peer-to-peer financing, where you would have to have one member pay for another member's share up front, and it gets into a lot of complexity. So the ideal with all of these models that you'll see, I think, across the board is that you want to have standardization with whatever you do and stick to it.
Just remember that the ITC, the federal tax credit, is done on a project-specific basis. So your project has to be able to be electrically unique, independently operating, which you could have a lot of those that look like they're in the same array based on how you would design it. But typically, in the absence of those complexities, which are not a bad idea, typically you're going to do a project that's going to go through a single inverter and meter, and therefore that's one project. So the ITC has to go to that project. So it's either going to flow through under what we refer to as a Section 25D compliant model, where it flows through and each of the people who buy in get that, so it reduces what they have to pay when they buy in, or it's going to go to the project entity, so it still has value, and therefore it helps contribute to what the subscriber on the pay-as-you-go model gets to experience.
Are there any kind of hybrid models that people have thought about? Like there's a question here about rent to own, maybe?
Well, there's a few hybrid models actually. Rent to own is a form of giving people the opportunity to own through time. Not everyone can come up with the upfront cost. So by allowing them to slowly pay in, they will come to a point where they can own it. And at the point they own it, then they can claim the ITC credit. So if you want to know, I favor own the solar panel if you can. Financing it means you're going to pay more no matter what. So if you can own it outright, buy it outright. If you have to finance it, then search for the lowest interest rate that you can find. There's a lot of open sources within the federal government and state governments which will help you finance. There's local banks that can give you a better deal. And think of it like a car, right? So if you buy your car, you pay cash for it, you pay that one price. You finance a car for 6 years, you almost pay maybe the price in a third. And so you want to eliminate that extra cost. Even though the solar, the faster you pay it off, the more return on your investment is. So that's what I do.
Just to add a little bit on the there's a structure called a partnership flip, right, where you can leverage a tax equity partner who's a financial investor. They can put the money, upfront money down for the system. They recover that money plus interest, over 7 to 10 years. And then after that time period, the system ownership flips, right, to a local organization, it could be a cooperative, right, or other owning body. And we do a lot of we've done a lot of financial modeling on that partnership flip structure. Typically, like in New York here, you can on day one, you can see significant energy price savings that can continue through the 10-year period with low or no escalation rates. And then when you get to that 7 or 10-year period, prices go down. And you got to start putting in reserves for inverter replacements. And even when you're funding reserves for maintenance, prices are dropped by multiple pennies per kilowatt hour. And so there's significant upside in that ownership, but sometimes you've got to give a little bit if you don't have access to the capital to finance it yourself.
So we, just for the record on partnership flips, we've done them, we've got almost 300 projects around the country, and we've done a lot of them, both in the wind. We've actually never done one in the solar space. But in all of the PPAs that we offer the opportunity to buy the system after the tax has expired. And in only one case ever in almost 300 projects has the person actually executed the right to purchase. Generally speaking, the reason that we find for that is that the same reason you don't have the capital to expend at the beginning of the project, you may or may not have that again in year 6 or 7. We love the option. Personally, myself, I would love to see the communities actually buy the systems, but we just haven't had a large uptake in that. We still give the option on everything to do in year 6. So, just from experience.
Yeah, and thank you for the clarification, but as system prices have fallen precipitously, partnership flips have often moved to a model where there's no cash payment at the end of that.
That's illegal from Mary's perspective.
It's just
Okay, let's not get too into the weeds here. Chris and Ben, do you have anything you want to add on sort of ownership, subscription, kind of, I know Ben, you have kind of a model to help people.
Yeah, well, I mean, the most important thing for our customers is that they're cash flow positive from day one, so that they don't have any upfront payment. They're realizing savings on their bill from the moment that they become involved in the program or in that community array. They also typically don't have any tax appetite whatsoever, be it property tax or income tax, which is our biggest challenge, particularly from a financing standpoint, of being able to make those customers bankable. So that, I mean, our biggest challenge in creating a model that works and that is sustainable and scalable is finding a way to make those clients bankable while also ensuring that they're able to see savings from the upfront.
Yeah, I think, we work with co-ops now, cooperative housing, affordable housing, and the idea, I think, of backing into ownership through the flip, where they have the possibility of buying that asset at a much lower cost in year 6 or 7, is attractive on the upfront, but I don't think it's the straw that stirs the drink. I think it's sort of extra, and it'd be interesting to see, once we get to year 6 and 7, how many of these, particularly co-ops, cooperative housing, to confuse everybody, cooperative housing, co-op solar on cooperative housing. These are buildings that are very debt constrained. They got a boiler that's going to go. They got a facade they got to fix. and they've been looking at electricity as an operating cost, and they're perfectly comfortable keeping it that way. So while again, you give them the option of that may score some points in sort of drawing interest, but I'd be surprised if a great number of them actually would go by it after research.
And I would just add that the co-op model is rent to own by definition. It's the same with like a rural electric cooperative. This is happening all over middle parts of the country that are primarily served by rural electric cooperatives. It's like a huge percent of the landmass of the United States is covered by rural electric cooperatives. They do community solar projects. They do these partnership flips. The cooperative owns that solar array, and that then flips, and it's owned by the cooperative, and through that democratic process, if you're a member of the cooperative, you own the cooperative, you own the asset. So that is the principle behind that, and all of our projects that would have no upfront payment would have that same partnership flip with a tax equity provider.
So can we talk about this idea of democracy a little bit, and sort of the idea of community involvement in the planning of these arrays? And I'm just curious to hear from all of you about kind of the opportunities here, whether you're a co-op model or an ownership model or a solarized model, what the opportunities are for communities or groups of people to actually be involved in the planning, ensuring community benefits. Is it only available if there's sort of community ownership and if they're a democratic co-op, or are there other kind of opportunities for that?
I think one of the things that's really interesting, which I kind of alluded to in the beginning, is not just looking at democratic participation in the development around one predetermined type of model, but rather looking at the basis, the model itself is where we get democratic. So let me give us an example. So some of the groups that we're working at right now with concepts are taking the basic regulation that virtual net metering, what's allowed there, and they're thinking, how do we fit this to meet our particular needs? So we have one that's an arts collective that's buying a building in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. How can they build a form of virtual net metering that fits their values and their goals? So for them, they like the idea of building a canopy-based solar system on their roof and having their residents, who are a bunch of art-strapped or cash-strapped artists that are getting priced out of Brooklyn, for which have to pay their own electricity bills. As part of their residency, they would get subscriptions, and they would realize lower costs of electricity. So that's like a really interesting sort of socially creative way of building solar around the core values of the organization. Catholic Church in the same neighborhood serves 90% immigrant population. Many of them are seniors, who statistically have the highest proportion of their income that they spend, most likely to suffer from energy burden. So what they're looking at, trying to find a way of concretely building a solar model that fits the encyclical, some of the messages of that. They have this idea of, let's get a third-party financed solar system on our roof, and then we'll identify a group of seniors within our community that will be subscribers, and then we'll philanthropically, which churches are good at doing, you may have heard, through the parish, prepay for those seniors. So again, the point I'm trying to make, and there's other examples I can say, that the HDFC model as well, there's the culture and the values of those communities are reflected in the model itself. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So that's the thing I think is really exciting about shared solar, is that it sort of liberates us to think about forms of solar, and for us not to also mistake the models that do exist now. There's nothing inherent about the technology that requires us to do that. That's just one way of doing this. Let's come up with many more of them.
Just to add to that, and Christian, in Solar One, your work in the community design process is absolutely exemplary at a national level. So some additional components within that community engagement process that's really also critical is to engage the utility, especially as we look at broader portfolios of projects where you say, hey, we're looking to cite 5 2-megawatt projects. It's so critical to say, hey, well, really, Mr. Utility, here's our motivations up front, right? We want resiliency. We want, our grocery store to stay online in the event of an outage. We want power to, our assisted care facility. And here's 30 or 50 different sites, parking lots, rooftops, other types of sites in many different locations. regulations, and to sit down early on and say, where in the community is this easy to interconnect, right? Where is it going to be resilient, and where will it fulfill our goals? So the utility is a critical part of the community process.
One way to think about it is it's not that different from a solarized program, in that you get a group of individuals from the community who are part of a stakeholder group that decides sort of what should be in the solarized RFP, and then you get responses. So similarly with the community solar project, you get bids from different developers who are offering you different models, and generally it becomes clear sort of who the winner is or who you want to work with from that process. And just like with Solarize, you can pick a developer who offers third-party ownership. You can pick a developer who only offers ownership rather than third-party ownership. Or you can find a developer who offers like a partner with a local bank that's sort of a lease-to-own model. So just like with Solarize, you sort of go through those bids, you see who you like, what aspects you like, what you don't. The other way to think about it is that, like a Solarize program, you do one way, and maybe you do next year another one another way. So you have one small, you can start small with a community solar project. There's certainly economies of scale for reasons to try and go as big as you can, but you start with one project, and maybe that project is a co-op model, and then the next year you try one that is, pay as you go, and you do another similar, procurement for a small solar project. And these all take time, but it's not like you only have one chance to do all of your community solar all at once. I think any of these options will likely work, and so you can always try another model, try another development going forward.
And one other thing that Joe and I and some of his colleagues at RMI have talked about, which I think is also really interesting, and it could be interesting to get the opinions of some of the developers on this, but we all know that the actual ultimate installed cost of a system has obviously many different components. There's a whole bunch of different things that are embedded in there, from site selection to labor and equipment and PII and all these things like that. And one of the things that we try to do in New York, there's a lot of pressure to try to lower that cost. That's one of the real big issues in New York City, we're trying to do it, is to really open that chain up and look at it with a microscope and identify what are actually all the real costs there. And when you're dealing with a community of people that want this, can some of those things actually be offset by a coordinated community? And one of the ideas that we talked about with RMI is, can you develop some type of platform where a community of stakeholders who wants a project to get realized could put forth in a very clear way, this is what we can do, right? We have a stake, we got a site, we could potentially put some labor in. And if you could actually quantify and negotiate potentially at a lower price through that type of engagement, that's an interesting form of participation. It's a sweat equity type of approach that could translate into greater economic value if people are able to take it on themselves.
I would just add that, one of the, in my opinion, sort of one of the simplest ways, like staying away from business models and staying away from, engagement in financing or types of, just pick areas of your towns. Find areas of your towns that you can agree on that say, like, this is a good community solar area. Maybe they have some transmission access or distribution access. Maybe they have some good land that's not otherwise being utilized. We want to encourage developers not to come in and take over a town park. We want them to come over here. We don't want to be on the trail you walk down to pick your wild blueberries. We want you to be over here where no one really uses them. You really just encourage that as sort of a pro-business community to sort of say, we want community solar in these particular areas, and just be progressive in that way and open your doors to folks like ourselves. And it's an engagement that doesn't require a lot of sweat equity, but it allows the community to sort of steer the result, sort of steer what developers are going to come in, where they're going to be, how they're going to interact with your community. And it's very simple, it's free, it's the type of thing that a few good, influential community members can get together and help promote for the entire town.
Yeah, there's a few examples I can throw out real quick. One thing is, so think from a zoning and permitting perspective, a bylaws perspective. There's quite a few towns in Massachusetts, for example, that have said, and made the decision, look, we have a frontage requirement, but for solar, there's no frontage requirement for solar. So what have they done? They've taken all these landlocked parcels of land that are typically back behind used to be farmland back behind the residential parcel. No tax revenue coming from that, can't be used for anything. Remove the frontage requirement for solar, there's now solar arrays back there. They don't bother anybody because nobody can see them except the landowner who's the host, and even then, a lot of times they can't see them. And now they're generating, good revenue, good economic development from that. So that's one approach that a lot of towns have taken. There's another small city in Massachusetts who has put out an RFP where they said, okay, here is a list of rooftops, a list of a couple of ground mount sites, one of them Old Town landfill that's capped, and a couple of parking lots. And said, okay, we're putting out an RFP. It's specifically for community solar. So anybody who wants to respond and tell us how much you would pay us to lease each of these sites in a lease. And then tell us what your community solar product, what is your offering to participants going to be? And then they will choose, and they have the criteria that they're going to score the bids on. Right? And so they're going to choose someone to lease those sites from the city. And then what the city has also said in that is that they're not committing to it, but they're saying the city is interested in being a subscriber for the anchor tenant, as we call it, portion, the up to 40%, or in Massachusetts, 50% of the net metering credits that they would buy and use to give to their low-income housing authority. So there's another idea that you can think of. So the bottom line is, if you're looking at whether it's an individual or a municipality at doing a community solar project or wanting to see something happen, you can either decide what you're specifically interested in, and then you can do it yourself, or you can talk to others. You can put out an RFP and see what, or even just an RFI and see what kind of interest there might be.
RFI is
about it.
request
Or
for
request for
information.
information.
RFP is request for proposal. There's actually a glossary that we put on your tables to help with this.
I wanted to speak just very quickly to Chris's point there, because I think it's a really interesting one that has not been as explored yet, of how communities can actually bring the cost down by working together on some of these pieces. And from our perspective as a developer and a community-based developer, there's like 20 things that need to happen to get a project just to the starting line. And it's expensive and it's difficult, and if there are community members who want to take on some of those responsibilities, and some of those key ones are site acquisition and customer acquisition, are two things that communities can do really well. If you know the farmer with the land that wants to put solar on it and they're all ready to go, that's a developer activity that communities can get the ball rolling on. And the same way with customer acquisition, all these communities are running solarized campaigns and have the 80% of people who never got solar on their roof who are probably a really good candidate for community solar. So those are two really specific things. And then the next question of if you can get people in on the majority of the cost, which is actually installing the solar, that's where grid alternatives and folks are kind of looking into that, and it's difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult, and I think that there is, traditionally the way this is looked at is that the price is a very black box type of thing from a consumer point of view. They have no idea. They would assume it's all equipment. It's probably general sort of thing. But it is the kind of work of our kind of groups, and we're a bunch of community organizations that are very proactively trying to make these projects happen. How can civil society organizations actually coordinate and start unpacking, not just site acquisition and a couple of things, but really looking at what those costs are and saying, well, we have engineers among us, we have accountants among us, we've got investors among us, we all together have collective advocacy power, and start bringing that to bear on the development process. I mean, I think that's like the really potentially creative breakthrough we can have.
I would just throw out a word of caution.
Throwing caution to the wind.
There's no one that throws more caution to the wind at this table than me, I guarantee you. But the one caveat I would say is, it's not that I don't want to use the talents of the individual community, because I do, but like I employ people with these expertise for a reason.
But you employ them, you pay them. Right. Right, so we're talking about, can they do these things?
If I could finish,
Sure.
what you would find if you found the right developer, and I will do this with you, frankly, so I consider myself to be the right developer, is I'll open the books to you. And I'll say, look, in order to run my business, and I've done this with communities from Kansas to Minnesota to Indiana, across the country, is I'll open my books with you and I'll say, look, I have to make 10% in order to stay in the business and go to the next level. And I'm willing to do that. And then I can deploy my expertise so that you don't have to harvest it, because harvesting that expertise can't be more, even in a pro bono sense, that costs money. People, it's going to take time. And so find the right developer that will open their books for you for true community work, and you'll get home maybe more expeditiously and still meet many of the goals that you're speaking to. And I don't discourage any of your thoughts. There's other ways to skin that cat, and the right developers out there. You know, I've been in the community win space and the leader in that space for almost 15 years, and we've done that with communities all over the place, and it's really been well received. Massachusetts, all over. So the opportunity is there where you can not have to take the time to manifest the expertise and have someone that's making a reasonable margin. The challenge I would find is if you have a developer that's really delivering you a black box and isn't willing to open it up, they are probably not the right partner for a community. That in and of itself eliminates the term community from
I actually
Okay,
agree with,
hold
I
on.
actually agree with both of you. So
So,
I don't think those are mutually exclusive.
so we've had a great discussion here about sort of models and experimentation, creativity, and I see some burning questions happening in the audience. So I have a kind of other kind of category of questions that are on these cards, but before I move to them, maybe we can open it up and take a few questions from the audience. So I see you, and there's one over here, so we'll take those three first.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
Happy to. Two pitfall questions. In some of the presentations, you talked about the Securities and Exchange Act, 1933. Is there any model among you where you're actually working through the SEC model, or are you working to avoid the complications of it? Second question, for solar, we have a tax exemption, Section 487, for 15 years, which exempts increases in your assessed value based upon the installation of the equipment. So in the year 16, you have a new cost. How is that addressed in your model with your customers? Do they understand there's a bump that comes in at that point?
So I think we addressed that.
Yeah, I mean, real quick, the short of it is, we price it in right now, so I know the depreciated value of those assets in year 16 on out. I can tell you we know what that is. So we'll just plan on that being what we expect the mill rate in the town to be, and we'll plan that into our model as a cost. Now, if we didn't have to plan for that, that would enable us to drive more benefit to the customer, because it's a cost you don't need. But we plan on it so that there's no risk to the customer on it. In terms of your first question about the SEC related piece, the bottom line is we just avoid it. So we make sure that what we've got structured as an offering, and I think everybody here will agree to the same thing, whether it's pay-as-you-go or ownership, is structured in such a way that we don't fall under selling a security or any of those acts.
And we actually see up in Canada, though, where the SEC does not have jurisdiction, the proliferation offering of solar bonds, especially in the Ontario market, that they've been incredibly successful, in part because it's a very simple value proposition. You know bonds, now there's solar bonds. Put it in money and make money over time. And so somebody may go through the pain of making a solar bond. SEC may be a lot more painful here than in the regulatory body in Canada, but I think over time we'll figure out mechanisms that are more familiar to what we're used to, or community solar will just become more familiar.
If regulation, federal or state, is in the way of doing what you want to do, and you're speaking to the municipal folks here, then deal with what you can at the municipal level. Tell your state legislators what you want taken out of the way. Tell your federal legislators what you want them taken out of the way. That's how it all starts. It won't be tomorrow, but it's got to have a start. It's going to have a finish.
I wonder if people could brainstorm situations for placing solar installations that are compatible, you know, patio, for example, parking lots or landfills or cow pastures? What are some creative things there to make people think about where you might put installations that would be compatible with some of these?
Look for light bulbs.
Throw in a floodlight into that.
Look for where, seriously, look for light bulbs, look for where there's high electric demand and use. Right? And generally, if you're siting near loads, right, you're going to have an easier time interconnecting. And if you have a hard time interconnecting, there's a lot of money in that pain. So it's expensive and it hits the economics.
And load is demand, by the way.
Energy use.
Energy.
Light bulbs.
So I agree with that point. I mean, the stuff that's driving the economics of this to the point where we can all sit here and fairly regularly say, you know, this stuff can be cheaper than what you're paying to National Grid or RG&E or NYSEG or wherever you're paying your electric to, is like economies of scale. You know, it's building these 2 megawatt systems at a time, you know, in a flat open field that's already been cleared. Like that stuff is where you're really going to drive the economics and maximize potential community benefits. Those things decrease. I mean, solar is deployable anyway. I mean, right, there's a wind turbine in my logo. The reason I don't only do wind turbines nowadays is because I can put solar most anywhere. But there's a cost to that. So, I mean, we've done carports. They're expensive to build. You know, so therefore the benefit to the community comes down. And so it's just a matter of balancing the economics of the installation with the benefit to the community, trying to understand where those can be linked in the best possible value proposition to electricity.
Chris, do you have an answer to that in terms of, you know, more urban area or in New York City, kind of what types of sites you want to look for?
Yeah, I mean, we said it a little bit in the beginning this morning. There are, you know, I know that Jeff, Clean Energy Collective, you've had some luck in finding sites, but you'd be the first to admit there's so many issues in finding large sites in which you can really accommodate what we could call conventional shared solar, which is like a weird term since it's not exactly conventional. But there's issues in New York City around not only a scarcity of large sites, but there's, given the property values and the dynamics of that, saying, I don't want this to be, I'm actively not wanting this to be a parking lot in 5 years. So to try to lock them into something that's a 25+ year asset is a problem. And then we have network grid issues where, you know, the utility there already stops projects for regular net metering on large rooms. If you're trying to build a 0.5 megawatt project that's supposed to export 95% of that power, those aren't going to make it. And then there's going to be a huge technical cost at the expense of the developer, which can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we pretty much knew that already. I've been working in New York for a long time. So for me, again, it's about, I look at the minimum number of subscribers. I would love there to be shared solars for people who live in brownstones that live in the basement and have 3 renters. Instead of having to merge their meters, use virtual net metering as the way to get around that so they can provide it to their renters. So we look at them for small, really small aggregations of, you know, anything from a 500 square foot, you know, I mean, we really don't, we don't look at it as a scale capacity thing. We look at it as a building initiative.
So there's a question here and a question. Go ahead.
Under the current regulations, 0082, on any model, if somebody signs up for 1,000 kilowatts a month and they decide to buy a Tesla and they want to charge it up overnight and now they need 1,400 kilowatt hours a month, how under any of your plans do they upgrade the amount of power they want to take out each month? Whether they own 5 panels or whether it's no panels at all. What methodology is there under the current regulations in New York State that allows a person to do that? To say, okay, the governor wants to get everybody using electricity, I'm going to do my part, I'm going to go buy a Tesla, or just an electric lawnmower. How does a person sign up to get more? I don't think there's anything currently that lets you do that.
Just call.
Pardon?
Just call.
Just call whom?
Me.
Oh.
Whoever your developer is.
Whoever your developer is.
So you're saying call a developer?
Okay, hold on. So in this scenario, you're a subscriber
Right.
to, or you own a piece of
Either
an
way.
array that's already developed,
Either model.
and somebody is the manager, the developer, or the project sponsor, somebody is the manager of that
Yep.
array. So the answer, we're
Yeah, it's
going to
just, I
call
mean,
the,
Just call, if the developer hasn't, capacity in the array, or the next array is under development, or whatever it is, we're gonna add you. I mean, the easiest part about that is you've already passed credit, you've already done all those sort of things.
I understand that.
Hey, let me, 'cause I think what you're missing.
But once a month, the sponsor has to communicate, in our particular case, with National Grid and verify that Joe Dokes is still going to want to take his 1,100 kilowatt hours this month. Now, all of a sudden, Joe Dokes wants to have 1,300 kilowatt hours. So the computers are going to talk to one another someday, because right at the moment, National Grid can't do that. But they're going to talk to one another and say, hey, Mary Jones wants to have 200 more kilowatt hours a month. Are you saying it's no more complex than that?
Yeah, there's no difference, right? The relationship with the utility just requires, if you don't increase your subscription or your ownership into a community solar array,
Yeah.
you're just going to get a bigger remaining bill from National Grid. If you do increase it, then you would be able to eliminate that increase in.
But isn't that the
electric
nub of the question, is how do you increase it
What it is
so
let me
it's
help you.
covered?
What you're, remember, when you wouldn't be subscribing to a number of kilowatt hours. So the way that all the programs in the US are structured is as a subscriber, whether you're doing a pay-as-you-go subscription or an ownership model, doesn't matter. You're signing up for a certain amount of capacity, which is a certain amount of kilowatts.
Yeah.
So if I'm building, just make it real simple, I'm building a 100 kW array.
Yeah.
And I've got 10 subscribers, you're one of them, and let's say each of you sign up for 10 kW of capacity.
Right.
That 10 kW of capacity in an average month maybe is going to generate, let's say, 130 kilowatt hours.
Yeah, if the sun shines a lot.
Right. So the amount of capacity you sign up for, whatever the array generates that month, if that's 10% of the project, you'll get 10% of the kilowatt hours. So if you want to get more, you have to sign up for more capacity.
You just said the words I'm looking for. You have to sign up for more.
Right. And so you may call, you wouldn't call me, you would call him. Of course, as we all would. And say, I want another 10 kW, or I want another 5 kW. You may say, well, I don't have it available for you in that project, that's sold out, but I have another project over here, or I don't have any more, and you'll go on a wait list.
Okay.
Or you call another developer.
I think you've answered my question.
Your other-
That is,
your
it
other
isn't easy to
option-
do.
Your other option is to call God, tell him to turn up the sun.
One point to add on that, this actually underscores a benefit of shared solar. The fact that you can even incrementally add on, if you were to decide in your home, you have X amount of solar up on your roof and then your load dramatically increases, there's all the fixed costs of adding solar on that would then be added on top of it. So the very fact that you can buy solar or sell it in slices is one of the
But on a rooftop system, you may not have space to put another panel.
Yeah. Oh,
The
yeah.
whole idea here is that rooftop is dead, as far as I'm concerned.
We've got a lot of customers, we have a lot of customers, it's not, I mean, they can work in parallel. We have a lot of customers, around the country that they've got solar on their roof, but they want more. So
Okay.
they have rooftop.
So I have some questions about the actual New York rules around this. Can you actually subscribe to 2 different arrays from
Yes.
2 different developers? Is that actually allowed by the Public Service
I think it
Commission?
is allowed.
Yeah.
But you can't have a host,
Although,
right?
if you're in the same load zone when you do that, and National Grid has your number, the fact that you're now asking for another customer number may trigger something.
Max?
I think the answer is no, but you could just drop your original subscription and come in next month.
That's the solution, I think, is the one. You get out and come back in.
Okay. So the answer might be no, but you could drop your subscription.
Or just next month have a bigger one. You can't own 2 though. It says in the order that you can't have you can't have solar on your roof and then connect to the same meter
Right.
with shared solar.
If you're already net metering, you cannot join.
Can I add one thing? It's a good point that Bernie said, the roof is dead. And that's what a lot of people think. In fact, some people at pretty high levels in the state, I think, have even articulated a similar idea, and you're finding out that that's definitely not the case. I'll say that for two reasons. One is that for us, for homeowners that we deal with, the best value you can really have is if you're able to buy and finance the system. We're seeing 5-year paybacks in New York City for that. As these developers here have mentioned, I don't know if one of you, well, it's more subscription-based models, right? It's more that you're getting some level of savings, and that has huge benefits, but the actual, ultimately the economic value isn't as great as if you own your own system at a 5-year payback. So there's still a lot of reasons why people would want to put it on the roof. And the other thing is, too, is that demand will always exceed supply, particularly in New York City. There's just not enough. We're not going to see this thing where you're doing a whole bunch of solar outside and then there's just an open market where anybody can just, like you go get a cell phone subscription, you can just go get your part of solar. So there's just not going to be enough to go around.
You can still use Staten Island.
Staten Island was already trusted. They're already way ahead of you. They're putting it on the roof.
We don't have to figure out if rooftop solar is dead today. Time will tell.
Okay, 3 actually. I know in New York City, getting permits is complicated, difficult. You may be able to understand. What suggestions do you have to make the permitting process easier? Secondly, if you are going to form a group to do this, do you have to make it a legal kind of structure? If you're organizing your community before you go out and hire or go for bids, what do you have to create in your group? Do you have to form some kind of structure in your group? Third question, like for faith-based groups who maybe can't benefit from rebates and so forth, how do you suggest that is the best way for them to be able to eventually buy the solar if they're going to have another group coming in and doing the initial work so that the benefits can be received by another group? 3 questions, sorry about that.
Sure.
You want me to start that? Because I can do
we can permit. Yeah, we can both do it. I think there's also maybe that Ali and Bill from Sustainable Community might be here. Sorry, I didn't put you on the spot. You just walked through the door, but.
Can you guys repeat the question before you answer it? Yeah, I'll just.
The question was that the permitting, various permits that are required in New York are a real problem because they have time uncertainty and cost. That's one of the reasons why we have very high installed costs in New York. The question was, what can we do to make that easier? I'll let Ben take the first stab at that.
The first one is what I was saying, to talk to your legislators and talk to the Department of Buildings and get your word out there, because that's where it all starts. Sustainable Community has done a great job at that, and their solar outlets are fantastic.
Can you use the mic?
The Sustainable Community has been very, very good at liaising between the Department of Buildings and developers, and they're a fantastic resource. But again, the Department of Buildings is doing a lot internally to bring down those soft costs. But other than going to the legislator and working with existing parties on bringing those costs down, unfortunately, they're fairly fixed.
Yeah, we are seeing progress there, but more advocacy is definitely needed, and we're getting to a good point, I think. Again, Sustainable Community's done a great job, and there's been some other advocates on the outside. But the other parts, I think it depends on the nature of the aggregation. My group does we aggregate a lot of homeowners, and then they collectively solicit proposals from installers and they make a decision, sort of a backwards solarized type of model. For that, we have those folks sign contracts so that the installer knows for sure that they intend to pick one installer and that they're all going to come to a unanimous agreement, they won't drop out. If you have a group of people that are trying to bring together an ownership type-based shared solar project, you probably want to have the same thing. You want to be able to give the bidders some certainty that you have skin in the game. It's not just sort of a verbal thing. So having some kind of document or something formal. Otherwise, it's just a group of people that are voluntarily associated. It would probably depend on the nature of the project and how big it is. And I'll let other people speak to that. But the faith-based part, I think, we are working with some faith-based organizations. There's obviously a problem that they're not able to capture the tax credits directly. But many faith-based organizations have a pretty good fundraising mechanism internally, where you can see that members of the parish will actually make contributions. We have seen that with a couple of churches and synagogues, that they're able to raise money actually from their congregation. There was an organization called Village Power, I'm not sure if that's still around, but they They also allow local members of faith communities to directly invest. Very, very low return. That those investors probably wouldn't normally, they wouldn't want to do that in their normal investments, but because they're members of this faith-based community, they're willing to take a lower return. So I think they can really leverage the fact that they're already a charitable organization that subsists,
Thank you.
Just to add to the last point on the faith-based group, there are a number of really cool solar developers around the Northeast that have created pretty small sort of internal financing mechanisms, particularly to solve that problem of the sort of 10 to 100 kilowatt not-for-profit organizations that want solar. Just do some research on that. There's some groups out there that are sort of self-funding them. We're one of them. I don't do it in New York City, but in upstate New York, I know there's a group in Maine, there's a group in Vermont, there's a bunch of groups out there that have created that. So the revenue they're making, whether it's rooftop resi or solar community or whatever, and they're sort of reinvesting that to offer that opportunity to other types of groups you're talking about.
Are there any other questions from the audience?
I have a question about energy efficiency. It may sound kind of silly with the obvious connection. If you use less, you will need less. But are there any either policy or funding connections possible between, say, an energy efficiency program and solar arrays?
Yeah, there's some examples nationally where participation in community solar arrays is it's a required prerequisite to actually do energy efficiency.
Have those worked out possibly, or?
Yeah, they have, and most commonly it's because it's an incredible economic value proposition that the community solar arrays bring, and people say, I want to participate in this, what do I have to do?
You just use less, right?
Use less. There's also incentives in some states where the value of the solar incentive is tied to completing energy efficiency.
Okay, so those are policies?
Yes.
And so we don't have those in New York State?
We've next been talking about the Affordable Solar Program, which does link and require small energy efficiency measures for a doubling of the current megawatt block rate.
Also, if you're an installer in New York and you're utilizing state incentives, you have to encourage and talk about energy efficiency. Not that that is a requirement for the person to go through, but it is part of it.
Ryan, you might be able to say something about the faith-based question. I know the group of churches that you guys work with on those energy efficiency projects that are looking on solar, do you know if they were able to find any of their energy efficiency or possible solar work through?
Yeah, so we haven't moved on to solar. That's still up there. But in terms of energy efficiency, I mean, they're able to take advantage of NYSERDA rebates, PSEG, which is out on Long Island rebates, and there's also a Presbytery loan fund very specific to the RFP that we did with the Long Island Presbytery. Yeah.
As I understand, the community solar project can expand, right? I mean, it's not a fixed entity, is that correct? You know, if demand is more, you could increase the amount of power that it produces?
Depends. So in New York, right now, 2 megawatts AC is the maximum system size. So if you're building your project at that size.
Say you're building at 1 megawatt and you want to increase it.
Then your issue would be, it would technically be a separate project because your ITC tax grant again. But yes, if you have a large enough area of land and you are not bumping up against the 2 megawatt limit, or let's say that limit is raised in the future, then the potential to expand an array. And that's one other exciting thing about solar is I don't think it'd be too long before battery energy storage technology will eventually be there, and we could retrofit a lot of these systems with that. And then they do become base load generation. And that's a game changer.
Would it have to be on the same site? I mean, could it be remote? Could you have something like you know, in a different area that would be part of the same solar, you know?
That's where calling it the same project or a different project is irrelevant.
To the road.
To the customer.
Yeah, as far as what the customer sees, right, it can run through one sponsor organization, and it can be seamless. So when they get their Tesla, they can expand their subscription, but it can be on multiple, maybe on multiple sites. And just one comment: if you're going to do this on one site, start with 500 kW and expand. Use string inverters.
Okay, sure.
And then you've got a lot of stuff together.
Before I take that question, we did have a question about battery storage, and when we think that's going to be a game changer. I think maybe this question is more generally for solar, but I want to put it to the community solar piece. Is this something that developers are thinking about now?
I think in New York City, there's a real potential way that batteries are the key to overcoming the problem that I mentioned around interconnection. Because then it allows you to, what the utilities don't like is the lack of being able to predict when, well, they'll know when the peaks are going to be, but they don't necessarily correspond to when the local distribution grid would need it. So if you could introduce something that could control when and how much of the electrons are hitting the grid so that it fits what the utility likes, you could get over that. Now, that would add a lot of cost to a project, but the thing that would be very interesting to look at, a lot of these ideal roofs that we're looking at are large commercial or industrial that have very high demand charges. So if you can come up with some sort of hybrid application for batteries that's able to help that site shave its demand charges, and could also potentially regulate the amount of power that went on, there's definitely a model there. So that's very technical, but it's saying that they're not totally unrelated. In fact, the gateway to solar, community solar for large properties in New York might be through batteries.
We're very engaged on storage on in the CNI space, and we see it as just south of 11 cents a kilowatt hour as being the current cost at a 1 to 2 megawatt size range. And we'll deploy our first battery in that size range this year, but I think in terms of it becoming broad scale adoption, particularly to CNI customers in upstate New York, CNI being commercial and industrial customers, that would be a couple of years away. The product costs are coming down, and the energy costs are coming up, so those will have to intersect closer. But to certain customers where the demand savings are very key or the reliability is very key, if the grid goes down, there is reasons to pay the excess, but it's not that far. It's not as far apart as it has been.
Okay, there's a question.
So this is the problem I faces regarding the solar roof thing in Florida. What exactly is the problem, and in your experience, what's the resale value of the house? How does it change from solar panel? I don't see that as a problem. I see that as an enhanced value for the house, and therefore it's easier to sell. Or is it the weight on it? Does it disadvantage or advantage?
For rooftop solar, you mean?
Yeah.
So for rooftop solar, it is an advantage. So the way that it works for our customers that have sold their homes, and we do have quite a few, the appraised value of the homes for the sale price actually will go up with the cost of solar, but there's a lock on the assessed value to not increase as a result of the solar. So the property tax can't go up, but the appraisal value can. That's the same for small wind. I have personal experience in, I had a small wind turbine on a farm that I sold just last year, and we got $20,000 extra for having a small wind turbine on it, same with a rooftop residential. So personal experience is it works, as long as the local municipality is cooperative.
Even if the tax went up, it's still going to be a gainer.
It can.
Does that apply to projects that have been a PPA on the roof, where Solar City leases your roof?
Well, the Solar City that's leasing your roof is dealing with the issue. At least you shouldn't say lease.
But that's a 20-year contract that about 50, at least in my home state, Massachusetts, about 50% of rooftops went to a rooftop lease, and that creates potential challenges with resale. So I will just say, if you own it outright, it increases value and it's not confusing. The next person buys it and it increases value. But if you've got this long-term contract and you don't own the thing that's on your roof, that's another layer of complexity.
Yeah, and I don't know if everybody heard the question, but it was about a person who has a rooftop system and they want to move to Florida and sell their house. So I think what we all know is that the data is now coming in very consistently, that it actually is enhancing to the value of the home, it doesn't detract. But there are products out there that are not just direct ownership that one needs to be careful of. But in terms of community solar, if someone's leaving and moving, again, we've had systems operating for more than 5 years, and with us, it's real simple, is we'll manage that. So if someone's leaving the utility area, they can sell it on their own. They can sell it with the house, they can give it to someone else, friend, family, they can donate it to a not-for-profit, or they can come back to us and ask us to resell it, because we always have people who came back and wanted to buy more, and so we manage the customer base just like other developers do as well.
You know, the PPA side, there's been a lot of like, oh, how are they going to deal with the lease? I mean, it's all just about how you educate your real estate broker and the buyer up front as to what they're getting, and it can be relatively simple to say this home comes with discounted electricity. This is, you know, we can assign you so long as you meet the same credit requirements, and you know, there can be issues, but there are plenty of issues that can crop up when you're selling a home that aren't related to a solar PPA. So it's just one of many items that you know, work with your real estate attorney and your broker to go through the, you know, purchase and sale agreement, and it can be relatively simple to, you know, educate. And this home comes with discounted electricity, whether that's through community solar or solar city deal, or their buyout provisions where you just pay off whatever is left. There's like, you know, a remainder payout, and that can be incorporated into the sale price. So there's ways to figure it out. It isn't a reason not to do it.
Okay, so I don't want to veer us off into rooftop solar since that's not the focus of the summit, the forum. We just have a few minutes left, and what we're going to do next is we're going to take a break. And then when we come back, we're gonna sort of facilitate some smaller group discussion. So we're gonna ask you to choose what group you want to be in. You're not wedded to your group. You can move around. If you felt like you chose wrong or you got what you wanted from that group, you can move. Do you have a question about?
What happened to Chris speaking for the National Grid?
I don't think we have time for that. But he's going to be around, so you can approach him and talk to him. We can have a small group with Chris.
I got the questions from next door.
Yes.
And I asked Chris or Carrick if I could take out ones I didn't like. Actually, they were all really good questions.
Wash your hands, right?
So if people want to, if there is interest in sitting down with Chris, we'll have a small group for Chris. And you can move in and out of that. So we thought we'd break people up based on, you know, if you're interested in talking to one of these people up here on the panel who is offering subscription model type projects, to sit down with them and get a little bit more in detail about what they have to offer and pick their brain about your project idea. We thought we'd have Isaac with a co-op model because we know there's a lot of interest in co-op, and actually I have a whole stack of questions about kind of very specific detailed stuff about co-op, which I can hand over to that group. Solarized campaigns and sort of the customer aggregation model where a community decides, hey, we might want to do a request for proposals and get a bunch of customers. We'll have a facilitated discussion about how to use Solarize for community solar, and then we will have a policy group. So if you're kind of not ready to talk about or don't want to talk about an actual project that you're thinking about or developing something, but you're more interested in kind of the policy questions, then that will be another group. Some of these groups are big, we might break them up a little bit further, but we feel like we'll see where they go. So we can have a 15-minute break, and then when you come back into the room, we will figure out how to identify where in the room you can go. Are there any questions about what's happening next? Okay, great. See you in 15 minutes.